Hello and welcome back to the Smash Archive, the series where we look at every game franchise represented in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. In the previous episode, we looked at all the smaller series that originated on the NES. So, as a follow-up, let's look at the games from Nintendo's next console, the SNES, as well as their first two handheld consoles, the Game Boy and Virtual Boy. Now originally, I was actually going to give the SNES and Game Boy separate videos, but I felt as though they didn't really have enough content to warrant their own episodes, so I decided to combine them into one bigger episode, along with the Virtual Boy due to that system easily being the least represented Nintendo console in Smash. Also, because I know some people might question this, when I say Game Boy games, I'm referring to games that released on both the original model Game Boy as well as the Game Boy Color, since whilst there are some people who consider the two separate systems, Nintendo often bundles them together as the same thing. With that out of the way, let's get started. Yakuman is a simple mahjong game which was a launch title for the Game Boy in Japan. Whilst Nintendo has been making mahjong games since the Famicom, the one on Game Boy was the first one to use the Yakuman name, with this particular entry being developed by Intelligent Systems, releasing just 1 year before the release of the first Fire Emblem. Given these games are just mahjong, the games are almost all entirely Japan exclusives, the only entry to release outside Japan being a Switch port of the arcade game Versus Mahjong. Because of that, and the fact these games are quite literally just Mahjong and nothing else, there's not much from the Yakuman series. The only thing taken from these games being Spirit number 1141, Yakuman Player, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Critical Health Attack Up. This being the guy playing Mahjong on Yakuman's box art, though he doesn't actually appear in the game. Pilotwings is a series of flight simulators that focus on beating missions in various aerial vehicles, with all the games being launch titles for their respective systems. With the original Pilotwings for the Super Nintendo, which used Mode 7 to create the illusion of a 3D space, Pilotwings 64 for the Nintendo 64, which furthered the concept with actual 3D models, and Pilotwings Resort for the 3DS, which connected the games to the Wii Sports series by having you play as Mii and being set on the central location of Wii Sports Resort, Woohoo Island. There's actually a good amount of content from the Pilotwings series, most likely thanks to its reputation as a launch title series and the connection to Wii Sports. To begin, we have the stage Pilotwings, which takes place on the wings of two different planes, the fight starting on top of a red biplane resembling the light plane from the original Pilotwings, which flies over the island runway from the game's third level. Eventually, fighters will switch to a yellow mono-wing seaplane from Pilotwings Resort, which flies around Woohoo Island, with it being possible to see Miis flying around with rocket belts around the island, until eventually returning back to the original plane. Outside of the transitions between planes, the only real stage hazard is the plane tilting as it makes turns, affecting how easy or hard it is to land on the plane's wings. Next is 6 music tracks. 4 versions of the light plane theme from the original Pilotwings, with the original song, two Smash 4 remixes with both a regular and vocal version, and a new remix. Smash 4 remix of the Turbojet theme from Pilotwings Resort, with the track also containing the game's opening music and part of Light Plane from the original game. And a Smash 4 remix of the Pedal Glider theme from Resort, though the song itself actually bears more resemblance to the Hang Glider theme. Then there's the item Rocket Belt, this being a jetpack which has acted as a recurring vehicle in the series since the original game. In Smash, it allows for extra jumps until eventually falling off of fighters, exploding if it contacts fighters or a ceiling whilst going upwards, with it also being possible to knock it off early by being attacked. Finally, there's Spirit number 1088, Plane, a 1-slot advanced support spirit with the effect Strong Wind Immunity. The art coming from Pilotwings Resort, where the plane's designs are identical to the ones from Wii Sports Resort's Air Sports games. The Super Scope, or Nintendo Scope in Power Regions, was a light gun accessory which was effectively the Super Nintendo's version of the NES Zapper. However, instead of modeling the accessory after a pistol, the Super Scope is instead based on a bazooka, with the accessory also being wireless and powered by batteries. The controller was bundled with Super Scope 6, a compilation pack of 6 smaller games, with another 11 games being made compatible or requiring the scope to play it. Like the Zapper, the Super Scope has had a few small cameos in other games, with a modified Super Scope even appearing as a prop in the live-action Super Mario Bros. Movie. Since this is a case of something in Smash being based on hardware as opposed to a game or series, there's only one thing that directly references the Super Scope, this being the Super Scope's appearance as an item, where it can shoot yellow energy shots with the size and power of the shots being based on how long the player holds the attack button, with larger shots also using up more ammo, the ammo count allowing a range of 72 weak shots or 5 fully charged shots. X is a 3D vehicle combat game for the Game Boy, which was developed in collaboration with Argonaut Games, who are most known for creating the Super FX chip and developing the original Star Fox, which due to both games' use of 3D graphics, sci-fi settings, and both being inspired by Argonaut's earlier work with the Star Glider series, X is sometimes considered a spiritual predecessor to the Star Fox series. The game being set in the future where an Earth colony on the planet Tetimus 2 is under attack from an alien force, the player being tasked to fight them off using the space tank Vixiv. Whilst a US release of the game was planned under the title Lunar Chase, the game would end up being Japan only. However, in 2010, the game would receive a sequel as DSiWare titled X Returns, this game being developed by Q Games, who made both Star Fox Command and 64 3D, with X Returns actually seeing a release outside Japan under the title X-Scape in the US and 3D Space Tank in Europe. Due to the original's legacy as a spiritual predecessor of Star Fox, we have a decent amount of content from X. First, we have 2 music tracks with 2 versions of the tunnel theme from X, with a Brawl remix and a remix taken from the sequel X-Scape. In addition, there's Spirit number 1142, Commander, a 1-slot novice support spirit which lets you start the battle with a staff. Also known as the Training Academy Coach, this is the character who assigns your missions for each level, effectively being the spiritual predecessor to Star Fox's General Pepper. Wave Race is a series of jet ski racing games which started on the Game Boy, which allowed for 4-player multiplayer via the link cable peripheral. Whilst this game specifically isn't well remembered, it did sell well enough to warrant 2 sequels, which are much more well known. The first being Wave Race 64, which was both the Nintendo 64's first racing game, and in the US was the third N64 game to release after the system's launch titles Mario 64 and Pilotwings 64, with Wave Race 64 also being a launch title in Europe, the game mainly being pushed with its at the time impressive water physics. Similarly, the third and currently last game in the Wave Race series, Wave Race Blue Storm, was a launch title for the GameCube, which doubled the number of playable characters from 4 to 8 and added weather effects which can impact the race. Since Blue Storm's release, Nintendo has been pretty content to just re-release Wave Race 64. Because of this, there's not much from Wave Race, the only thing being Spirit number 1158, Ryota Hayami, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Swimmer, a Japanese racer from Wave Race 64 who is the older brother of Akari Hayami from the 1080 Degrees series. He's sometimes considered to be the main character due to him being the first character on the select screen and being the average all-around character recommended for beginners. The art is from Wave Race Blue Storm, where he removed his goggles and helmet to gain more recognition, with him once again acting as the game's all-around racer. Kaeru no Tame ni Kane wa Naru, or in English, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls, is an action-adventure game made in collaboration with Intelligent Systems, this time releasing the same year as the second Fire Emblem game. The game having you play as the Prince of the Sable Kingdom, who sets out to save Princess Tiramisu of the Millefield Kingdom from King Delarin and his Krokian army, with exploration requiring the prince to make use of animal transformations given to him by the witch Mandala. The game's exploration is very similar to Legend of Zelda, with the game's engine actually being reused for Link's Awakening. The main difference between the two being how combat is presented by having fight dust clouds appear when you touch an enemy, with the person who's stronger ultimately winning, the only input the player has being to use items or run away. Due to its connections to the Zelda series, we have a good amount of content from this game. First, we have an assist trophy of the game's main protagonist, the Sable Prince, in Smash attacking fighters by trapping them in a dust cloud attack, with him jumping in large arcs in his frog form or slithering across the floor in his snake form to reach opponents. Then there's 3 spirits. Number 1143, Frog and Snake, a 3-slot advanced primary shield spirit which can be enhanced at level 99. This being the 2 animal transformations the Prince of Sable takes, with him turning into a frog from touching cold water and a snake from eating eggs. Number 1144, Prince of Sable, a 3-slot legend primary shield spirit with the effect transformation duration up. The Prince's human form, which he can retake by eating joy fruit, with him also turning back if he runs out of health. And number 1145, Prince Richard, a 3-slot ace primary neutral spirit. The Prince of the Custard Kingdom, who is competing with the Prince of Sable to be the first to save Princess Tiramisu, acting as a friendly rival. Battle Clash is a futuristic action game which is played using the Super Scope, taking place in a dystopian 21st century where the world governments have fallen, with it now being ruled by a group of chiefs piloting mechs called Standing Tanks, or STs for short, led by a guy called Anubis, with the game seeing you play as Mike Anderson, who plans to fight Anubis and the other leaders with his own ST as revenge for his father being killed by Anubis, with the game requiring the player to shoot the enemy mech's weak points whilst defending themselves from attacks. Whilst the game would later receive a sequel with Metal Combat Falcon's Revenge, given that they're both fairly obscure light gun games, there's very little from Battle Clash. The only thing taken from these games being Spirit number 1150 ST Falcon, a 1-slot novice primary attack spirit, this being the mech that Mike, the game's main protagonist, uses to combat against Anubis' forces. Stunt Race FX is a cartoony racing game, with its name coming from its use of the Super Effects chip to allow for 3D graphics, with Stunt Race FX being the second game to use that chip after the original Star Fox. The game has you play as various vehicles with cartoon eyes, with races requiring the player to complete 3 laps before the timer runs out, without destroying their vehicle or coming 4th place, along with a stunt mode requiring you to collect as many stars as possible on the track. Despite being one of the earlier games to use the Super Effects chip, the game is kind of obscure, mainly thanks to the game having only seen one re-release, that being in 2019 as part of Switch Online. Because of that, there's not much from this game either. The only content from this game being 2 spirits. Number 1151, F-Type, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Undamaged Speed Up, one of the starting vehicles modeled after F1 cars, which is recommended for advanced players due to its high speed and acceleration, but weak defenses. And number 1152, Tractor Trailer, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect braking ability up, a semi-trailer truck which can only be played during the optional bonus rounds in the speed tracks mode, which is effectively the main game mode. Now we have the only Virtual Boy game to be represented in Smash with Teleroboxer, which, if you can't tell from the title, is a boxing game. Specifically, the game takes place in a first-person perspective, being set in the 22nd century with a technology called telerobotics, allowing people to remotely control robots, in this case specifically for boxing matches. Teleroboxer is arguably the most famous original title for the Virtual Boy, with it also being one of the few games to actually use the controller's 2 D-pads to control each hand. Despite that, given the Virtual Boy itself was a commercial failure, selling only 770,000 units before being discontinued after less than a year, being one of the most recognizable games for the system isn't really saying much. Because of that, the only thing from this game is Spirit number 1157, Harry, a 1-slot novice primary shield spirit with the effect Fist Attack Up, this being the robot controlled by the game's main protagonist, which weighs in at 4,300 kilograms and stands at 3.85 meters tall. Panel Panel de Pon is a puzzle game for the Super Nintendo which focuses on switching around coloured blocks in order to form and clear lines, this being another game made by Intelligent Systems. Whilst the game was released outside Japan, not only did it get renamed to Tetris Attack, despite the gameplay having very little resemblance to Tetris outside of being a block-based puzzle game, but all of the original characters were replaced with ones from the Yoshi's Island series. The series would receive a few sequels and spin-offs under the new title Puzzle League outside Japan, namely getting Pokemon reskins for the N64 and Game Boy Color, being part of a Japan-only compilation pack for the GameCube alongside Yoshi's Cookie and Dr. Mario, being packaged with Dr. Mario again, this time for the Game Boy Advance, a DS game titled Planet Puzzle League in America and Puzzle League DS in Europe, which also had a cheaper, stripped-down version released as DSiWare, and finally a Puzzle League minigame was included in the Welcome Amiibo update for Animal Crossing New Leaf. There's a decent amount of content from Panel de Pon, though it all entirely revolves around the first game, namely its main protagonist, Lip. First, we have a Brawl remix of Lip's theme, which played whenever Lip was on screen with large significance, with the localized Tetris Attack version using it as the tutorial music. Next, there's the item Lip's Stick, this being the flower wand used by Lip. In Smash, hitting an opponent with it causes them to grow a flower on their head, with the flower causing continual damage for a short period of time. After that, we have a Mii sword fighter costume based on Lip, with the sword being Lip's flower wand. Finally, there's spirit number 1153, Lip, a one-slot ace support spirit which lets you start the battle with Lip's Stick, a flower fairy who acts as the protagonist of the original Panel de Pon, who in the game's story mode is working to save the fairies from a curse set by the Demon King Thanatos. Marvelous is a series of action-adventure games which started life as a 4-part broadcast for the Satellaview, a Japan-only Super Nintendo add-on which lets players download games, magazines, and other media via satellite broadcasts. The game would later see an expanded physical release with Marvelous Mohitotsu no Takarajima, which was also Japan exclusive, most likely due to the game coming out after the N64 was already released and the commercial failure of Earthbound, though the game is recognised as the first game directed by Eiji Aonuma, the project manager for the Legend of Zelda series, with his work on Marvelous often being credited as to why he was brought onto Zelda, starting with Ocarina of Time. Outside of another Satellaview game, the only other attention the series has gotten was a Japan-only Wii U Virtual Console release, a minigame based on the first Marvelous game appearing in the Japanese and Korean versions of The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, and the game Triforce Hero being sometimes considered as a spiritual successor to the Marvelous series. Because of the game's obscure origins, the only content from this game is Spirit number 1154, Dion, Max, and Jack, a 3-slot novice primary neutral spirit, a group of kids who act as the series' main protagonists, the artwork specifically coming from Mohitotsu no Takarajima, where they travel to an island to find the treasure of the pirate Captain Maverick. The original Game Boy title, we have Mania, a puzzle game which centers around navigating mazes to get a ball to the end, with it being possible to dig through soft ground to create underground tunnels to navigate between areas, and levels later introducing enemies and gimmicks like weights, pipes, and barrels. Since this is a one-off puzzle game for the Game Boy, which released well after many other notable Game Boy puzzle games, Mania is mostly regarded as being the most obscure game which Shigeru Miyamoto was involved with, him being the game's producer. Like a lot of the more obscure games talked about, the only thing from this game is Spirit number 1146, Muddy Mole, a one-slot novice support spirit which lets you start the battle with a drill. The game's main protagonist who is working to solve the puzzles in order to save his family from the cabbage farmer, Jinbei. Sutte Hakkun is a series of puzzle platformers consisting of 3 Satellaview broadcasts and 1 physical release, with all the games having the same gameplay with different levels. The game requires the player to move and recolor blocks in order to navigate levels to collect all the rainbow shards, with points being awarded based on how many moves it takes the player to beat the level, starting at 1000 and decreasing with each movement, jump, and the taking and release of an object. Whilst the Satellaview versions haven't been re-released, the physical game did get ported onto the Wii and Wii U's Virtual Console, albeit in Japan only. Since this is another pretty obscure Japan only game, this is yet another series where the only piece of representation is one spirit, that being spirit number 1155, Hakkun, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect transformation duration up. A colorless blob who acts as the game's main protagonist, with him being able to carry blocks by absorbing them through his needle nose. Famicom Bunko Hajimari no Mori was a text-based adventure game made in a similar style to the Famicom Mukashibanashi series, with Hajimari no Mori only seeing release via the Nintendo Power cartridge, these effectively being the successor to the Famicom disc games, being special cartridges that could have games downloaded onto them as a cheaper alternative to buying the full retail game. Whilst the game never received a proper physical release, it would re-release on the Wii and Wii U's Virtual Console in Japan. Since the game is effectively a Japan-exclusive digital-only title, this is another series that only has one spirit. This time being spirit number 1156, Girl from Hajimari no Mori, a 1-slot novice support spirit which lets you start the battle with a super leaf. A yokai named Komurasaki from the Ayakashi tribe, who the game's main protagonist meets and befriends in the forest, with him going on a journey to find her after she goes missing. Trade and Battle Card Hero is a card-based RPG for the Game Boy Color made by Intelligent Systems, the goal of battles being to use various cards to summon monsters and power them up in order to attack the opponent's Master Card, whilst making sure your own Master Card doesn't lose all their HP. Whilst a US release was planned, it was ultimately scrapped, making it a Japan-only title. Despite this, the game would receive 2 sequels for the DS, both of these also being Japan-only releases, these being Kousoku Card Battle Card Hero and Card Hero Speed Battle Custom, the latter of which was a digital title released as DSiWare. Thanks to this series having more than one game, we have a bit more than a lot of the other obscure series in Smash get, Card Hero being home to 2 spirits. Number 1147, Maruhige Shop Owner, a 1-slot advanced support spirit with the effect Item Gravitation. Named Maruo Maruhige, this is the person who sells all the cards both the player and everyone else in the games use throughout the series, the art coming from Kousoku Card Battle Card Hero. And number 1148, Satoru, a 3-slot novice primary grab spirit. The main protagonist of the second game, a second-year high school student who alongside their childhood friend Haruka works to become the world's greatest card hero player. Chee-Chai Alien is a creature collection game for the Game Boy Color, the game being both developed and published by Creatures Inc., the same company behind the Earthbound series and the Pokemon trading card game, along with various Pokemon spin-offs. The game focusing around using the Game Boy Color's infrared scanner to find a race of aliens called Chaliens, with each one having a mini-game that can be played by playing with them in a similar manner to a Tamagotchi, story progression being locked behind extracting their dark matter. The game would later receive a spin-off on the GBA with No 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 Puzzle Chalien, which was a minigame collection featuring the Chaliens, the Kotopachi 6 minigame eventually getting a standalone release as a DSiWare title, which was also the only title to release outside Japan under the title Spin 6. Since this is a series that consists of one game and a spin-off, with the only thing seen outside Japan being a digital-only standalone release of one of the minigames from the spin-off, this is yet another series to only get one spirit. This being spirit number 1188, Lil Blue, a 1-slot novice support spirit with the effect Fire/Explosion Resist Up. A Chalien who can't be captured but provides tips acting as a guide for the player in the original game, as well as providing facts for beating puzzles in No 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 Puzzle Chalien, with Little Blue sort of being the series mascot. And with that, we've covered all the smaller series that originate on the SNES, Game Boy, and Virtual Boy. For the overall rankings, Yakuman, Super Scope, Wave Race, Battle Clash, Teleroboxer, Marvelous, Mania, Sutte Hakkun, Hajimari no Mori, and Chalien are all tied 153rd with 54 other series. Stunt Race FX and Card Hero are both tied 109th with 42 other series. X is tied 88th with 20 other series. Kaeru no Tame Nikane wa Naru is tied 73rd with 14 other series. Panel de Pon is tied 62nd with 10 other series. And Pilotwings is tied 43rd with Wii Sports, putting it above Nintendogs and Ice Climber but below Rhythm Heaven and Pac-Man. This also making it tied for the 6th most represented series which doesn't have a playable character. From a recent poll, the next episode we'll be looking at is all the content in Smash taken from Capcom. So if you want to see that episode when it comes out, know when the next poll is, or keep up with anything else happening on the channel, be sure to subscribe. And if there's a particular series or video topic you want to see get covered, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching.